Hey everybody, I'm Sam Gross with electricbikereport.com, and this is the Ride1UP Cafe Cruiser. It's an affordable electric cruiser bike that's spec'd out with some smart component choices and has a slightly unique styling. But we're going to put this bike to the test today in the real world to see how it performs. The Ride1UP Cafe Cruiser is an affordable electric cruiser bike from a company that bills itself as a specialist in making really good affordable electric e-bikes. And this is a really good example of a nice affordable e-bike. First, let's start with the styling and the overall look of the bike. Something I really like about it is it kind of reminds me of those old Harley Davidsons from the World War II era. It's got a really low slung ride with really big cruiser handlebars that give you a nice upright riding position. It's got a broad saddle to support your sit bones. It's overall just a really comfortable e-bike. Now this is a class 3 e-bike that's capable of going up to 28 miles an hour on pedal assistance and 20 miles an hour on throttle assistance alone, and it's powered by a 750 watt Bafeng rear hub motor that makes 60 Newton meters of torque. Inside the frame is a 48 volt 15 amp hour battery or 720 watt hour battery that gives the bike a pretty solid range. You also have a Mozo suspension fork out front that has 80 millimeters of travel. That's designed just to give you a nice little bit of extra cush over the bumps. You've got some nice wide tires, and overall it's just a really nice e-bike. One thing I like about this bike, even though it is at a very affordable price point, is you're seeing a Shimano Acera drivetrain. That's an 8-speed drivetrain, which a lot of e-bikes at this price point we see coming with a 7-speed drivetrain. So you get one extra gear with something like this. That's an example of how Ride1UP knows how to spec these affordable e-bikes in a little bit of a different way than some of the other brands we see. But overall, this is a really nice riding e-bike. I enjoy it, I like riding it, but let's dive into how it's actually performing in the real world. Braking on Ride1UP's Cafe Cruiser is handled by a set of Zoom hydraulic disc brakes with 180 millimeters rotors front and rear. This is a really common affordable brake set that we see often on bikes like this and that we're really familiar with it. But to get an idea of how it performs on this specific bike, we're going to put it to the test in the real world where we bring the bike up to 20 miles an hour 5 times and slam on the brakes as hard as possible to get an average stopping distance. So let's see how this specific bike performs. The Cafe Cruiser performed surprisingly well in our braking test, especially for a cruiser style e-bike like this one. It came to a stop on average in 11 feet and 8 inches, which is substantially better than our current average braking distance of all the bikes we tested at about 16 feet even. Now this is notable because cruisers don't typically stop super duper well. They're much more close to that average braking distance mark, but this one has gone several feet better than that, so really solid result from this bike. So to get an idea of how the Cafe Cruiser's 720 watt-hour battery performs, we put it through 2 separate range tests. The first is in PAS2 and the next is in PAS5. In that PAS2 test, we saw a range of 45.56 miles, and then PAS5, we saw a range of 26.23 miles. Now those are both solid results, but they're not quite as high as what we'd normally expect from a bike with a 720 watt-hour battery, which is just ever so slightly larger than the 672 watt-hour batteries we most commonly see on affordable e-bikes. Now, a little bit of context to that, just like the hill test, this bike put up remarkably fast overall average speeds during both of those tests. And average speed is kind of tough to gauge on how, we're doing these tests on bike paths. So you get a lot of traffic, you get a lot of variables you can't really manage. But these were good enough average speeds they're worth noting. In that PAS2 test, we saw an average speed of 14.1 miles per hour, and then PAS5, we saw an average speed of 19 miles an hour. That's really, really quick over the span of either more than 45 miles or more than 26 miles. So really good range results from this bike, not quite as far as we might expect from other 720 watt-hour e-bikes, but really fast, really far, probably plenty far for what most average people are going to use an electric cruiser bike for. So a little bit more on the Cafe Cruiser's 750 watt rear hub motor from Bafang. We've already talked about its hill climbing ability, but let's talk about just its overall speed. And this is a really fast e-bike. It's a class 3 model, which means it's capable of speeds up to 28 miles an hour. And this thing really has no issue on flat ground cruising right at that 28 mile an hour mark. It is remarkably quick. Again, as evidenced in our range test as well, with that 19 mile an hour overall average over more than 26 miles. Really, really quick performing motor. It's fast on the throttle. It's got a really nice and responsive cadence sensor, so it's going to be able to pick up whether or not you're pedaling, and it engages the motor very, very quickly, whether you want it to turn on or turn off, which is a really, really nice thing, especially on an affordable e-bike such as this one. And it's got a throttle that's capable of speeds up to 20 miles per hour and 5 levels of pedal assist that divide up the pedal assist. We put those pedal assist levels to the test on our electric bike report circuit to get an idea of the bike's performance in each of the 5 pedal assist levels, plus 1 lap with the motor entirely off. And what we found was a range of speeds from 13.5 miles an hour with no help from the motor at all the way up to a scorching 24 miles an hour on PAS5. That is a huge, very broad range of speed, and we also saw each pedal assist level kind of give you a really nice step and consistent step up from the next in your overall average speed. So they did a really great job with the pedal assist levels. And that over 24 mile an hour max hot lap in PAS5 is just a really good example of how quick this bike really can go on flat ground. It's very fun, especially in that kind of upright cruiser style position. The Ride1UP Cafe Cruiser has really similar handling to a lot of the other electric cruiser bikes I have reviewed. It's a very long e-bike. It's got a big wheelbase on it, so it doesn't turn super, super quick, but that long wheelbase gives it a nice, really stable handling at speed. It's also very, very predictable. It's also got these very wide and long cruiser style handlebars that are super duper swept back. This helps give you a really nice upright and comfortable riding position, and all of your weight is supported on that very broad comfort style saddle. In corners, it's very predictable, though it does have a very wide turning radius, which is something to keep in mind, like say you're on a bike path like this and you want to do a U-turn. But in your average corner, it's just a nice, relaxed, kind of lazy handling almost. It's very predictable, almost relaxing to ride. The ride experience on it is very nice as well. Ride1UP's got a very simple but effective and utilitarian display on the left-hand side of the handlebars, and right next to that is a thumb-style throttle, which I personally very much prefer over the twist-style throttles. You also have that 80mm Mozo suspension fork out front, which does a really nice job of absorbing any sort of road vibrations, or like, say you got to get up over a curb, it takes the edge off of stuff like that. It's just a really nice, comfortable cruiser bike. It rides exactly like a cruiser bike should. I think if you're after this style of bike and you want that nice upright riding position, this one's going to do just fine for you. So to get an idea of how the Ride1UP Cafe Cruiser climbs hills, we're going to put it to the test on our test hill Hellhole. Now Hellhole is a 1/3 of a mile long. It's a 12% gradient on average. That is plenty steep and plenty long to put even the most powerful e-bikes to their true test. We're going to see how this 750 watt rear hub motor from Bafang stands up. All right. Doing the throttle only test of the Ride1UP Cafe Cruiser. Get an idea of what this 750 watt Bafang rear hub motor can do. So while it is 750, this motor makes 60 Newton meters of torque, which is a little on the lower side of what we see from some 750 watt rear hub motors, but I'm not sure how that's going to play out on this hill, especially in the throttle only test. So we're seeing some pretty drastic reduction in speed on the steep section here. Usually my cutoff is about 3 miles an hour before I call it. And we're down to 4 right now. Starting to have to balance the bike a little bit. And we're below 3, but I'm gonna see how far this thing will go. And that's it. All right, now onto the PAS5 test of the Cafe Cruiser. It's gonna be interesting to see how this fares. It's a little bit help for my legs. Starting to cycle through the gears, as we usually do once we switch to PAS5 and put a little leg power into it. We're already seeing a difference in speed. Just cruising through the gears. Dropped down to 8 miles an hour, but we're almost through the steep section. Gaining a little bit of speed as the hill flattens out. Got one more tough part. This is like 50 yards of steep. One last little pitch. Motor seems to be faring all right. And we're nearly there. We got a little bit of a mixed bag result out of the Cafe Cruiser on our test hill hellhole. We did 2 separate tests, one using just the throttle and the second using PAS5. And in that throttle only test, the bike actually didn't make it to the top. And in the PAS5 test, we made it to the top in 1 minute and 26 seconds with an average speed of 12.6 miles an hour. Now let's add some context to those results. It is not terribly common for us to see a 750 watt powered e-bike not make it up our test hill in the throttle only test. More often than not, those bikes make it. Maybe they struggle a little bit, but this one didn't clear it. One important thing to keep in mind is that even though this is a 750 watt rear hub motor, it only makes 60 Newton meters of torque, which isn't all that much. This is a cruiser style e-bike. It's not really designed to go after those really, really steep hills such as Hellhole. I can personally attest that it does just fine on kind of those mid-size hills, and when you do actually have it on flat open road, that 750 watt motor is remarkably quick. We'll dive into that a little bit later, but it's still a good climbing e-bike. It didn't take all that much effort from my legs in PAS5 to make it to the top, and 1 minute 26 seconds is a respectable time. So I wouldn't go as far as to call this not a good climbing e-bike. It's just not the best on the really steep stuff. Overall, there is quite a lot that I've enjoyed about the Ride1UP Cafe Cruiser. It's not an absolutely perfect e-bike. We've talked a little bit about its struggles on the really steep sections of hill we've tested it on, but hills are not really this bike's story. This is a cruiser style e-bike. It's going to be most happy on a coastal boardwalk or in a small town in California riding along the beach. It's not designed for the super steep hills that we put it to the test on here. And even then, it still made it with just a little bit of help from my legs. It's still a decent climbing e-bike, but I've really, really enjoyed testing it. One thing I've entirely failed to mention throughout this entire review is this rear rack that's actually welded onto the frame instead of bolted. It's got 130 pound carrying capacity. They even sell a passenger kit for this with foot pegs and a small seat. So if you do want to carry a passenger along, you can with this thing. It's also a very comfortable riding e-bike. It's got a nice broad saddle to support you, really nice swept back handlebars for an upright riding position. It's just a good e-bike, and I really like its looks. The World War II kind of Harley-Davidson styling of it. It's even got a little bump on the top tube where a gas tank might be. Overall, this has been a really nice e-bike, and if you've enjoyed learning more about it, be sure to like and subscribe to the Electric Bike Report channel for more updates from Ride1UP and the other brands we cover. And if you want to know more about this specific bike and the data we collected on it, there is a link in the description below this video for a more thorough written review with all of that included. For Electric Bike Report, I'm Sam Gross. Thank you so much for watching.